Okay, let's dive right into this. Today's explainer covers an absolutely harrowing, yet highly actionable true crime and survival story. We are unpacking the power of no, which is Justin Beck's incredible journey from the very bottom of the international drug trafficking abyss straight into a masterclass on building daily discipline. This isn't just your standard story about surviving the unthinkable. It's actually a structural breakdown of how human beings can systematically reclaim their minds and their lives, literally one single choice at a time. To really understand how Beck's story unfolds, we have to look at how it started. And it didn't begin with some desire to rebel or peer pressure or even a desire for drugs at all. It actually began with an overwhelming, invisible burden. Beck was born into a world that was just way too loud and too bright, a childhood defined by the intense sensory overload of what would later, much later in his life, be diagnosed as autism and ADHD. The true tragedy, he realized, wasn't getting hooked on drugs. It was getting hooked on quiet. He lived with what he vividly describes as the matrix rain. Imagine, just for a second, having to constantly run mental calculations, reading every single face, filtering every word, and tracking every tiny sensory input in a room just to survive a normal Tuesday. It was totally exhausting. But at age 12, behind a parish hall, an older boy handed him a joint, and for the very first time in his entire life, the matrix rain stopped. The hum of the light bulbs vanished, the exhausting calculations ceased. He experienced this profound, single-voiced silence. Without even realizing it, a 12-year-old boy had just effectively outsourced his peace of mind to a substance. Let's move to and see how this builds, because that initial relief quickly evolved into what Beck calls the drift. It's fascinating and honestly terrifying how logical it felt to him at the time. By 12, he was using his piggy bank savings to buy and sell weed. Why? Well, because his pattern-reading brain just saw a market. By 14, standing 6'10" and easily walking into pubs, he shifted to selling cocaine strictly for the better profit margins. And by 16, he was working 7 days a week, funding a lifestyle that demanded cocaine just to stay awake so he could sell more of it. It didn't feel like an addiction to him at all. It felt like pure business competence. It felt like complete control. But that control, it was a complete illusion. As the drift continued, crack cocaine entered the picture. Crack promised the ultimate quiet, but the reality was a stark, brutal contrast. Instead of total peace, it brought the deeply humiliating reality of losing absolutely everything. It replaced his internal matrix rain with a much louder, completely relentless demand to just feed the pipe. We're talking about pawning high-end electronics, then white goods, and eventually the highly specific humiliation of pawning a cooking saucepan just for a hit, leaving him literally on his hands and knees, combing the carpet for crumbs. Remarkably, Beck actually managed to claw his way out of that specific abyss. He got clean for 6 whole months. He was eating, sleeping, and thinking straight again. But that pattern-reading brain of his, which was still deeply driven by ego and that old illusion of control, led him to a completely mundane Toby Carvery restaurant on a Sunday afternoon. There, over a roast dinner, he casually agreed to traffic 1.5 million pounds worth of cocaine out of Brazil. He thought it was the ultimate comeback. He truly felt like he had outsmarted the entire system once again. And then, the small print of his life choices finally read itself out loud to him. On day 9 of what felt like a totally victorious trip in Rio, their luck ran out at Galeon Airport. The process was brutally swift. Checking in, the bags being unexpectedly pulled down to a massive runway scanner, and the police slicing them open to reveal this massive mushroom cloud of cocaine exploding into the air. In that exact fraction of a second, Beck says his lifelong internal calculations just stopped. There was no comeback left to plan, just terrifying, unavoidable consequences. Those consequences took the form of the Brazilian maximum security prison system. He was eventually sent to Bangu 8. Now, if you want to talk about sheer unpredictable terror, imagine a maximum security prison where the director himself is a severe, chemically unraveling crack addict. Beck was trapped in an abyss ruled by a man consumed by the exact same drug that had just derailed his own life. The director would torture inmates for pleasure, waving a loaded gun in their faces, completely governed by the chaotic, moment-to-moment demands of his pipe. Survival in that kind of environment required near invisibility. Later on, Beck was moved to another block, Esmeraldina Bandeira, into a sweltering cell crammed with 62 men. Cocaine flowed just as freely inside the prison walls as it did outside. But one night, sitting quietly on his bunk, Beck observed 3 specific inmates. He saw an 18-year-old kid just singing, totally oblivious to what was coming for him. He saw a 25-year-old career criminal, essentially his exact mirror, and he saw a 75-year-old lifetime junkie, still desperately chasing the high. So the crucial point is, his pattern-reading brain suddenly saw the entire picture all at once. He didn't see three separate men anymore. He saw one terrifying, unified trajectory. Past, present, future. All laid out right there in front of him. Over the next 18 months, he would watch all three of those men die brutal, horrific deaths inside that prison. But in that singular flash of absolute clarity on his bunk, he finally understood exactly where his own life was headed if he didn't fundamentally change course. Seriously, think about that for a second. What do you do when you see your actual unavoidable future staring directly back at you in a concrete cell? For Beck, this was the defining moment of his existence. Right then, someone offered him a line of cocaine. Out of 62 desperate men in that cell, he was the one who quietly said no. He chose none of those futures. There was no dramatic cinematic speech, no applause from the other inmates. Just a man on a bunk reclaiming his life with one single word. So how do you stick to a decision like that, in an environment where drugs are literally everywhere? Well, he didn't rely on willpower. Willpower is finite, right? It runs out exactly when you need it most. Instead, he used visual evidence. Every time an offer came, he just looked over at those three men. Patterns don't unsee themselves. This simple act of saying no sparked what he calls the excavation. He finally broke the secret identity mask he had worn for 20 years to hide his autism and his addiction, and he actively started claiming real mental space away from all the noise. In the terrifying gaps between that crack-addicted director's violent visits, Beck began to deliberately rebuild his mind and his body. And the mechanics of this climb out of the abyss are just incredible. He read science and Zen philosophy brought in by a visiting pastor. He used his unique brain to draw incredibly complex fractal diagrams of his cell, and he would lock his feet to his metal bed frame, doing thousands of sit-ups. He was actively creating a rigid structure of survival, proving that discipline is something you can build from the inside, even in a place specifically designed to strip away every choice you have. Now, why does this matter so much to us? Because Beck makes it incredibly clear. The no he discovered in that cell is not a destination you reach and just check off a list. It is a daily practice you maintain. And this extreme survival tool, forged in a literal Brazilian maximum security prison, is completely applicable to the mundane, everyday lives that you and I lead. The environment might be wildly different, but the human mechanism of choosing what to build or what to destroy is exactly the same. When Beck was finally released and returned home, he had to learn how to live in the real world all over again. He adopted a framework from a mentor called the 5-point system. It breaks down like this: 20% for work and finances, 20% for education and skills, 20% for exercise, 20% for family, and 20% for fun. Protecting all 5 of these areas equally, that is essentially the structural version of saying no to the drift. If one area starts consuming the others, you know you are slipping right back into the drift. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly where recovery and discipline actually live for all of us. It's in the everyday no's. It's saying no to skipping meals and ignoring your sleep schedule. It's saying no to doom scrolling on your phone at midnight, which, by the way, runs on the exact same dopamine-driven voice that tells an addict just one more. It's saying no to commitments you only make out of pure guilt, and no to consuming junk content that just robs you of your time. The stakes might seem a lot lower than running with a drug cartel, but the core mechanism of eroding your life is identical. Years later, Beck realized something super profound about his recovery. He didn't have to white-knuckle his sobriety anymore. His core identity had been completely rewired over time. The no wasn't holding the door shut anymore because the version of him that needed the drugs simply didn't exist. True purpose didn't arrive as some grand 5-year plan on a vision board. It arrived when his son was born. His ultimate purpose was just being a present, stable father, passing down foresight instead of chaos. Remember, every small victory is a brick, and every single no builds the solid foundation of the life you actually want to live. Beck stood in a Brazilian prison and chose to stop drifting. But the drift never completely vanishes, does it? It just gets better interfaces, like our smartphones or our daily bad habits. It is always available. So I want to leave you with this final thought as we wrap up this explainer. The power to stop the drift is entirely in your hands, one choice at a time. What will your no be today?